California farmers were big Trump backers. They may be on a collision course over immigrant deportation. A paradox is settled across California's velvet green fields and orchards. California farmers, who are some of the most ardent supporters of Donald Trump, would seem to be on a collision course with one of the president-elect's most important campaign promises. Trump has pledged to carry out mass deportations of undocumented immigrants across the country, including, he has said in recent days, rounding up people and putting them in newly built detention camps. If any such effort penetrated California's heartland, where half the fruits and vegetables consumed in the U.S. are grown, it almost surely would decimate the workforce that farmers rely on to plant and harvest their crops. At least half of the state's 162,000 farm workers are undocumented, according to estimates from the Federal Department of Labor and research conducted by UC Merced. Without sufficient workers, food would rot in the fields, sending grocery prices skyrocketing. And yet, farmers are not railing in protest. Many say they expect the president will support their workforce needs, either through a robust legalization program for workers already here, or by leaving farms to be and focusing enforcement elsewhere. Some are also pushing the government to make it easier for them to import temporary guest workers under the H-2A visa program, which allows farms to hire seasonal agricultural workers when the domestic labor supply falls short. Caroline Levitt, a spokesperson for the Trump-Vance transition team, did not respond to questions about agricultural workers specifically, but said, quote, "The American people re-elected President Trump by a resounding margin, giving him a mandate to implement the promises he made on the campaign trail, like deporting migrant criminals and restoring our economic greatness. He will deliver." Now that's an interesting bit of evasion there.
Yes.
Notice she didn't say migrants. She said migrant criminals.
Yeah, this is a pattern now. They're starting to back off this a little bit as they realize the impracticality of it. I don't think the inhumanity of it really bothers them very much, but I think they're realizing this is not as workable as we thought, especially with inflation already hurting people.
I was just going to say, we ran on bringing down inflation.
Yeah.
$12 lettuce is not going to play well with our base. And don't tell me about how Americans will work these jobs. Americans can barely get down the block, much less spend a day in the fields. In that context, Steve Scaroni, the founder of one of the largest guest worker companies in the country, Fresh Harvest, predicted an increased demand for the thousands of workers his company brings in each year from Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, for 3 to 10 month stints picking lettuce, strawberries, and other crops. Quote, "Most farmers are realizing that they're going to need to implement the H-2A program at some level to assure that they have labor," Scaroni said, "because we just don't know what the deportation is going to look like." Farm workers and their advocates are anxious both at the prospect of mass deportations and a huge expansion of guest worker programs that in the past have spawned complaints about shorted paychecks, unpaid travel time, and unsafe housing. Now, we always want to play it fair. We always want to play it straight. The strange thing about this to me, this particular paragraph, that doesn't happen to undocumented workers. Like, that's particular to guest worker programs. Like, why would you be in more danger from shorted paychecks from a program that presumably would have some kind of accountability than you would from being a guy with no papers who's getting paid under the table? I would think you'd be more at risk of that.
Well, I think there's no real accountability. Don't they get into this article where, like, yeah, they basically, the people who are supposed to hold this system together tend to look the other way and not do the proper vetting. They tend to look
the other way, but I can't see the risk as, presumably, you could complain to say, yeah, I'm not saying they don't fuck them. I'm not saying this is false. Right. But presumably, at the very least, there'd be some kind of government agency to complain to. It probably won't do anything. But in any case, why would it be worse? Like, why would it increase the risk of that happening?
That's a good question.
Sarah, a farm worker living in Riverside County who asked to be identified by only her first name because she is undocumented, said she and fellow workers harvesting cilantro in the eastern Coachella Valley share a pervasive sense of dread. Every year, the Coachella Festival, the music is awful. My children scream. Undocumented people are the ones who are really doing the tough work, she said, because we need to make money to feed our children and elderly. Asked about the calls to expand the H-2A program, Sarah responded, why not give work permits to the people who are already here instead of bringing more people when there are lots of farm workers here already? For decades, California farmers and the workers who tend their crops have been engaged in a complicated ballet. It is technically illegal for farmers to hire undocumented workers, but some people in the industry say it happens regularly, an assertion research backs up. One major hiring route is through farm labor contractors who seek out workers, request their government paperwork, and dispatch the worker to farms during harvest and planting seasons. The contractors routinely tell farmers that the workers have valid paperwork, but according to people knowledgeable about the industry, they don't always verify that paperwork. Quote, our hard stance is we are not document experts, said one contractor, who asked not to be identified to discuss sensitive legal matters. He noted that workers give him social security numbers, and months later, he said, he often receives notice from the government informing him that many of those numbers do not match the names the workers have given. But by then, the harvest is over and the workers are gone. Quote, everybody knows how the game is played, he said. Given this state of affairs, he predicted if any of these mass deportations happen, it's going to be catastrophic for the industry. It's not yet clear how Trump's rhetoric on deportations will play out. He and his advisors have stressed that their first priority will be criminals and those who pose a threat to national security. It is possible that most farm workers, documented or not, would be unaffected. Following the deportation sweeps of 1954, according to UCLA history professor Kelly Hernandez, that was under Eisenhower, was called Operation Wetback, I shit you not.
Yep.
Border Patrol officers pressed farmers, particularly in South Texas, to stop hiring undocumented workers and instead avail themselves of the Bracero program. That guest worker program was launched during World War II to bring Mexican workers to America's fields, while American workers were fighting overseas and continued to grow after the war ended. According to statistics from the University of Colorado, the number of braceros in the United States jumped by more than 100% from 1952 to 1956, rising to 445,000. Many ultimately settled in the U.S., but while in the program, many were subject to exploitation, working long hours for little money and facing demeaning treatment at work sites, which again, I don't see how that's particular to legal programs. I would imagine that's at least as bad, if not worse, for someone who's not in some kind of a program. Antonio De Laura Brust, a spokesperson for the UFW, said he fears similar abuses could follow an expansion of the H-2A program. Again, this whole formulation doesn't make any sense to me. Delora Brust called the program a recipe for exploitation because a worker's permission to be in the country is tied to the employer. Employers control nearly every aspect of the workers' lives, he said, which I would imagine is true if you're undocumented. Okay, so it sounds like the signals we're getting from them, and we covered this with Rand Paul the other day, it looks like what they're going to do is go after criminals and get a lot of favorable publicity from their base off that, I would imagine. Look, we're rounding up all the people. Right. They emptied out their jails in Venezuela. We're going after them. Do they go further than that? As they point out, a lot of people will say, yeah, we want to get rid of these people. They don't want to pay $20 for cucumbers. Right. And that is what would happen if you got rid of all of these farm workers. And don't tell me Americans would do those jobs. Wait, what is it? What is the obesity rate? It's something like 70% of Americans are obese. Don't tell me they're going out in the fields to pick fucking strawberries all of a sudden.
Yeah, here's the work. We can't play the sound because there's copyrighted music, but this is the work for what, 10 hours a day?
Yeah.
No American is going to do this for a living wage. This is why I don't think, this is why a lot of this is not thought through, I don't think. People who think that immigrants are taking good paying jobs in this respect. Now, obviously, there are other industries, construction being one of them, right, which you've talked about. But as it pertains to farming, the food companies are not going to pay American workers $25 an hour to do this. That's not going to happen. They're going to find a way to not do that. What you will have is choked supply and increased prices on top of a market that is already inflated. And so you start rounding people up. And what did the article say? Just about half of the farming workforce in these fields is undocumented labor.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So that adds up pretty quick if you're talking about a true mass deportation. How is the market going to absorb that?
You're literally talking about crops rotting in the fields.
Well, yeah, of course.
There won't be anyone to pick it.
How could it not? How could it not? So how is that
I mean,
workable?
I don't know, though, Keaton. Look, maybe we can combine the Make America Healthy Again agenda with the immigrant agenda and get the Americans out there getting some exercise, picking that lettuce.
Yeah, there you go. That's something. That's something. Well, here's Scott Jennings, who, is a conservative pundit on CNN. We've been seeing quite a lot of him lately. He responds to a question from Jake Tapper about what a mass deportation of workers would do to the markets. And here's his answer.
Two things. Number one, Donald Trump was elected to do this. He ran on it, made it clear what he wanted to do. The American people voted for it. And so some people are watching this going, thank God, a politician who's planning to follow through on their promises. Number two, there's like 1.3 to 1.6 million illegal immigrants who've already received deportation orders from a court. I think you could start there. Number three, there's another population of people who are violent. You could also go there before you ever get to people who are sort of working in industries. And maybe during the course of all that time, maybe, just maybe, the Congress and the White House could figure something out about how to balance our illegal immigration crisis with the need for agricultural labor. Final point, I don't remember anybody having these kinds of meltdowns when Barack Obama deported 5 million people. It is not uncommon for the executive branch to deport illegal immigrants. It happens in every administration. Obama deported more than most. And I don't remember any of this kind of meltdown, and the crisis has only gotten worse. So I think Donald Trump's doing the right thing, and most Republicans would agree it is a national emergency.
So that is a pro. He's saying we're going to start with the people who've already received their deportation orders. Then we're going to go to the criminals. While we're doing that, we'll figure out something to do about these workers. And by the way, no one complained about this when Obama did it, right? Like he put the answer to the question in the middle of all of the talking points because they don't have an answer to this. They're not going to be able to do
this.
They're
going to have to go guest worker.
Yeah, they're going to have to go. Well, that's what Rand Paul said. He says they're going to have to give work permits, which at that point, like, look, I understand people saying you should deport violent criminals. I don't think anybody's against that. But
Chase Oliver is.
Yeah, Chase Oliver is. Yeah, exactly. Who's the government to tell you where you can go and who you can kill? I mean, it's not the role of the government to step in that situation. No, but like beyond that, I just don't see how they can implement this without disrupting markets, because don't forget, there's inflation already. They're already talking about tariffs, so that's going to be more inflation. Now you're talking about getting rid of half of the workforce that picks the fruit. I mean, it just doesn't seem workable.
And whose back is that going to land on the most? A lot of the MAGA base.
Exactly. Well, this is why the messaging around the economy was so tied to immigration. Like I said, I tweeted out a few days ago, the Trump term 2 seems to be Reaganomics with illegal immigrants as the new welfare queen. Reagan demagogued against the welfare queen as the poor person who's holding the middle class back from becoming rich. And that's kind of the role the illegal immigrant plays in this formulation. The problem is, of course, that there is no payoff. Where's the payoff? Once they get rid of the immigrants, how does that improve economic conditions? It doesn't, especially when you're looking at this, which is only going to drive inflation up more and disrupt the market more.
Yeah, I would imagine, hey, should we have millions of people in the country that we can't keep track of and we don't know that they're here? No. But if you're really going to convert millions of farm workers to a guest worker program, you're going to have to create some kind of federal bureaucracy that probably doesn't exist, or you're going to have to greatly expand one that does. And yeah, you're going to have to put a whole system in place. It's not something you're just going to be able to do with a snap of your fingers. And yes, unless you want to pay $20 for lettuce, deporting all of the illegal agricultural workers, that's a non-starter. It's a non-starter. And Americans are not taking those jobs. There was a section of that article that talked about what they get paid. And I think in California, what did they say? It's actually about 20. It's around 20 an hour. You are not going to get millions of Americans who are going to go do that. Even for 20 an hour, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
You can make it 50 an hour. I literally don't think you have enough Americans in physical condition
who could do that. Right. Yeah. It's a huge workforce. Yeah. Yep. I agree. And so, yeah, I don't think they're going to be able to follow through on this. I don't think it's a promise.
Not on that scale.
Not on that scale.
They're gonna get rid of criminals, and they're gonna make a big show of getting out the criminals. Right. But the agricultural workers, they're going to have to go guest worker, and then they're going to have to create bureaucracy.
Right.
Maybe move some of those workers that the Doge people are cutting from one part of the government and move them to managing, keeping track of millions of farm workers.
Yeah, exactly.
Please clap.